The term fairy faith simply refers to the old folk beliefs in fairies and the practices found therein. It is most often used in relation to Ireland and Scotland, where belief in fairies lingered long into the modern era. However, this belief system has analogies in other places where belief in fairy-like spirits continued on into the present day, such as in Iceland, Native American tradition, and in many Asian cultures. The modern notion of fairy is vastly different from that which our ancestors knew. While it's fair to say that the image of the fairy has changed a number of times, its origins sprang from the murky haze of the Neolithic period. In those times, ancestor veneration was a common feature among Indo-European cultures. Both the Celtic She as well as the Germanic Elfar were originally both associated with burial mounds, and therefore appear to have derived from ancestor worship. The word She originally meant the mound itself, but eventually came to mean the spirits who dwell within. And Elfar is the Norse word from which the modern word elf derives. Even into the modern era, fairies continued to be associated with the dead. In fact, some folklorists have noted that in folk accounts there is not a clear differentiation between ghosts and fairies. The other world inhabited by fairies was often associated with the land of the dead, and spirits of dead relatives and ancestors were often said to be living in the land of the fairies. Spirits of the mound are one direct foundation of elf and fairy belief, but the belief is also influenced by the demotion of pagan gods during the conversion to Christianity. It has been noted that belief in small spirits continued on in folk belief for hundreds of years after conversion. The great pagan gods were sometimes diminished into smaller spirits of the land. By small, I don't necessarily mean in stature, as fairies and elves were often reported to be as tall as humans, but their power and roles were lesser than the mighty and central role that the great gods once played. For example, the Irish gods of the Tuatha De Danann were later associated with fairy lore long after their pagan worship ceased. As Christianity arose in Celtic and Anglo-Britain, the indigenous fairy beliefs were grafted into the Christian lexicon, altering beliefs further. Not only did powerful deities of mythology become shrunken into fairy lore, but ideas about fairies changed to fit the Christian paradigm. Instead of being spirits connected to earth-centered spirituality, it began to be said that fairies were the fallen angels. Another story is that they were angels who had refused to take a side during Lucifer's revolt, so that they were damned to exist between heaven and hell for eternity. Because the Judeo-Christian pantheon has only the God Trinity, Satan, angels, and demons, these extra-biblical indigenous spirits had to be made to fit a biblical context. Thus, they were relegated as demons by church leaders. The image of the sweet little pixie with butterfly wings comes strictly from the Victorian era. In folklore, fairies have many different descriptions that range from helpful to harmful and could take the form of humans, animals, or some other unique figure. The modern view depicts fairies in their role as charming elemental spirits. While these supernatural beings were long associated with nature, in the past this was often in a frightful way. One example is the Slavic woodland guardian called the Leshy. Forest spirits like the Leshy were known to be wily. They might lead the careless wanderer off their path and then disappear, leaving only their echoing laughter as the traveler finds himself lost in the wilderness. Other nature spirits could be just as dangerous. Water spirits, like the mermaid, might seduce a young fisherman, only to pull him to his death beneath the waves. These beliefs mingled with Christianity, so that while the common folk viewed themselves strictly as Christian, their worldview accommodated a mixture of both traditions. The mixture of old belief with new religion is called popular religion, and it refers to the practices of the common folk when it differs greatly from the official religion preached at the pulpit. This phenomenon is found all over the world when a new religion replaced old animistic beliefs, even in Buddhist and Islamic societies. One practice that is found all across Europe is the act of making offerings to fairies. Rather than slaughtering an animal for blood sacrifice, offerings given to the fae are typically in the form of food and drink, with grains, dairy, and salt featuring prominently. This is true for both domestic and certain types of nature spirits. In regard to household spirits, they were often considered part of the family, and therefore given a portion of the household food just like family members. Offerings were left for nature spirits also. For example, the aforementioned forest spirit, the Leshy, traditionally received gifts of salt and bread from Russian peasants who hoped to pass through his woods safely. In addition to food, some spirits could be propitiated with coins. The act of throwing pennies into wishing wells is a nod to the ancient act of offering coins to water guardians in exchange for safe sailing. You may be surprised to hear that the fairy faith is alive today. Every child who tosses a penny in a well is keeping the tradition alive. Leaving cookies and milk out for Santa Claus is another vestige that mirrors leaving milk and grains out for house elves. While perhaps less common, reports of fairy sightings or interactions are still recorded today, and with the rise of neo-paganism in recent years, fairy belief has regained a home in the lexicon of modern religion. My name is Carolyn Emmerich, and I write on European historical folk belief. Please visit my website to read more.